Hello and welcome to DAS Health webinar, MIPS Math 101, the ultimate guide to MIPS scoring. My name is Bridget Peterson and I am part of the government incentives team for DAS Health. Before I get started, I would like to take a moment to explain the process for today's presentation. First, I would like to mention that this webinar will be recorded. We'll send out a copy of the slides and recording within the next week. Next, for those of you who aren't familiar with DAS Health, I encourage you to visit our website, connect with us on LinkedIn, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can access all of our historical webinars. I also want to mention the upcoming educational webinar series, MIPS and CHIPS, a Lunch and Learn series on each category of MIPS that we will be presenting in May and June. The first one will be on the quality category on Wednesday, May 3rd. Next will be the Promoting Interoperability category on Wednesday, May 17th. Third will be the Improvement Activities category on Wednesday, June 7th, and the Cost category on Wednesday, June 21st. These will be shorter than our typical hour-long webinars and focus on current requirements, best practices, and strategies to score high in each one of these categories this year. We will also be having our traditional webinar on achieving NCQA PCMH recognition utilizing a PRIMA on Wednesday, June 14th. We will be sending out an invitation to the webinars a week or so before, and we always post on our LinkedIn page as a reminder, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Okay, so back to today's webinar on MIPS Math 101, the ultimate guide to MIPS scoring. At the end of the presentation, we will open the floor up for questions from you. We will answer all questions at the end, but you may type them in the question area of the webinar control panel whenever they occur to you. Finally, for audio clarity purposes, everyone's phone will remain muted throughout the entire webinar. If you experience audio issues, please use the chat box to let us know so we can help resolve them. And again, questions may be entered in the questions box. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our team who will be your presenters today. Myself, Bridget Peterson, a Government Incentives Consultant, Lindsay Lanning, our Government Incentives Manager, and Kimmy Watson, our other Government Incentives Consultant. We all have been working with MIPS, PCMH, and many other quality reporting programs for years, and each have our own areas of expertise, and we are very excited to help your practice in any way we can. So Lindsay, the webinar is all yours, and feel free to get started when you are ready.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Bridget, and thank you everyone for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. I don't know about you, but it is blue skies and sunny where I am at, so I'm very thankful. I know we have a lot of amazing information for you today, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of jump right in here and dive into what we're calling MIPS Math. I have to share how we came up with this webinar idea. So on one of our team calls, we made a joke that we never realized just how much we would be using our 5th grade math in our future careers. And really how convoluted this whole scoring process can be if you aren't doing it on a daily basis like we are. So we started referring to it as MIPS Math in our team meetings, and we realized many of you could really benefit from a lesson in MIPS Math. So you can make sure you have an accurate understanding of your practices or your provider's performance, and you actually, get a high final score to earn money instead of being penalized. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to basically take you through scoring your practice's MIPS data in 8 steps. Now, there is some background information provided throughout based on the program and the categories, but not a ton, right? We really wanted to focus on the math. So if you're looking for more of a comprehensive review of requirements, please join our upcoming Lunch and Learns with our MIPS and CHIPS series. Those will answer kind of the more basic questions. You also can always email us directly. That email will be on our screen at the very end of the presentation today. But again, today's really about understanding the scoring from start to finish. And don't worry, we did include some more advanced scoring scenarios, not just the straightforward ones, in case we have some fellow MIPS experts on here. Those are just going to be towards the end of each category section. So, all right, we're going to take you through the following 8 steps today to score your practice. So let's start with steps 1 and 2. And to do that, I apologize, but we have to know what MIPS is. I swear this really is our only intro slide. All the rest align with the step in the process, but as I'm sure you all know, MIPS stands for Merit-Based Incentive Payment System, and it was developed to improve patient health outcomes by tying payments to quality and cost-efficient care, with the whole intention to increase the use of healthcare information and reduce the cost of care. Believe me, we know probably more than anyone that MIPS sometimes gets a bad rap. You know, a lot of it's just another set of requirements, it's more clicks or burdensome workflows that my clinicians have to do. And I hear you, but at its core, this program does work to improve patient care and patient outcomes. If MIPS was a person that I met out and about, I would say they have a really good heart, and it's the thought that counts here. You know, there really is good intention behind this program. In reality, what this program did was really consolidate legacy programs into one. So we used to have the PQRS, the value-based modifier, and good old meaningful use, and now we just have MIPS, which each one of those legacy programs align with the category under the current program. So those categories are what determine your final score and what we're going to look at today. Okay, so on to the information we have to know in order to score your providers or practices. So first up is eligibility. You're eligible to participate in MIPS if you're a MIPS eligible clinician type. You also have to meet all the other requirements, which we're going to go over next. So if you're not one of the clinician types listed on this slide, you're excluded from reporting under MIPS and you're not penalized. You do not have to report. But if you are a clinician type listed on this slide, or you have these clinician types at your practice, you may have to report for them. It's going to depend on a few things. First is your NPI and your tax ID. When you join a practice and reassign your Medicare billing rights to a tax ID, or what we call a TIN, your NPI becomes associated with that TIN. And this association is referred to as the TIN-NPI combination. Genius, I know. Now, if you reassign your billing rights to multiple tax IDs or TINs, and you bill Medicare Part B claims under multiple tax IDs or again, TINs, you'll have multiple of those TIN NPI combinations. So basically, if you practice at more than one entity, CMS is going to evaluate each one of your TIN NPI combinations for MIPS eligibility. So you'll have to check eligibility status for each one of those combinations, meaning at each place that you practice. So to determine MIPS eligibility, CMS actually reviews past and current Medicare Part B claims for clinicians and practices twice for each performance year. So each review, or what they call a segment, analyzes data from a 12-month period. Analysis of data from segment 1 is released as preliminary eligibility determinations, and then the analysis of data from segment 2 is reconciled with the results from segment 1 and released as what they call the final eligibility determination. And you can see the date ranges we're currently working with for 2023 eligibility, starting all the way back from October 2021 to September 2022, and then that final range is October 2022 to September 2023. It's what we're in right now is that segment 2. Now, you might be wondering, what are they looking at our claims for? You know, what are they trying to determine for eligibility? Well, in order to be fully eligible and therefore required to report under MIPS, you have to be one of the previous listed clinician types. And then during both of these segments, you need to be over what's called the low volume threshold. The low volume threshold is the volume of covered professional services, Medicare patients, and associated charges a clinician or your practice must exceed in order to be MIPS eligible. So you must participate in MIPS if in both of those 12-month segments of those determination periods, you billed more than $90,000 for Medicare Part B covered professional services, and you saw more than 200 Medicare Part B patients, and you provided more than 200 covered professional services to Medicare Part B patients. I do want to point out that these thresholds are the same at both the individual NPI level and the group level. So if you exceed all 3 low volume threshold criteria as an individual, you are eligible for MIPS and are required to participate and report MIPS data. If your practice exceeds all 3 low volume threshold criteria as a group, the practice is eligible for MIPS and can choose whether or not to participate as a group. Notice individual required, group optional. So if you or your group exceed 1 or 2 of these criteria, but not all 3 during one of these 12-month time periods, you're not required to report. But you do have the option to opt in. That's the official term for it, basically volunteer, right? To participate in MIPS if you want to. So I get it. Some of you on the line might be thinking, are you crazy? No chance I would choose to do this if I didn't have to. But hold on, we actually assist a decent amount of opt-in clients right now, or clinicians, because they're doing the required documentation and workflows, and they want the extra incentive money, especially to help offset the Medicare fee-for-service reimbursement cuts they're doing right now. So it is something to consider. Even if you find your providers are not actually required to report, they can opt in and get a piece of the pie of the incentive payments. But again, it does open them up to a potential penalty if they aren't performing. And again, please note, you have to exceed the low volume threshold in both segments to be eligible. So this means you can't become eligible in segment 2 if you're currently ineligible in segment 1. You can opt in, but you won't be required. Again, if you think about this, it makes sense, right? Since the last snapshot for eligibility is released in November, right, after that October 2022 timeframe. So you could imagine finding out in November of this year you have to report and you had no idea. That's why they do it this way. So to check your eligibility, you can look up an individual's NPI with the CMS NPI lookup tool, or you can log into your QPP account and see all the eligibility details for all clinicians associated with your practice. You're looking for the green check to signal eligibility, or the black circle to show if you're not eligible. So to use the status tool, you just enter in the 10-digit NPI and make sure you're viewing your performance year 2023 eligibility status. So you can see along the middle of that second screenshot, it will look at each performance year since the start of MIPS in 2017. So you can look back and see previous eligibility, which is always fun. But you just want to make sure it's set on 2023 this year to understand your requirements, for right now. If you see a black circle next to individual, that means you're not over the low volume threshold for that first segment. And even if you're over it for segment 2, again, your status isn't going to change to eligible for 2023. Although for 2024, you may then be required to report, right? So if you're eligible the second segment of this year, next year, the next segment, you might also be eligible as well. So if you're teetering somewhere close to that line of that low volume threshold, this changes every year. So you need to make sure you check your status every single year. So the NPI lookup tool is, it's just that. It's a great, quick and easy tool. But we always encourage our clients to review statuses in the QPP portal. In that portal, you get a bit more information. Again, you want to make sure you're looking at 2023 information, but if you navigate to the eligibility and reporting tab on the left-hand side, and then you go to the practice details and clinician page, it provides the current eligibility status for your practice, group participation-wise, right? And then also the individual clinicians at your practice all in one place versus looking up each one individually. You would click that View Complete Eligibility Details to see the more detailed information about the low volume threshold and where exactly you stand, as well as any special statuses held by your practice or individual clinicians. Now, one special status I do want to point out, because we're going to talk about it a lot today, and again, there are many more, but for the sake of our scoring examples today, this is the main one you need to know. And would likely apply probably to the most people on this call today, and that's the small practice designation. You're considered a small practice in CMS's eyes if there are 15 or fewer clinicians billing under your practice's tax ID during one or both of the 12-month segments of those MIPS determination periods. You'll actually earn 2 times the points for each improvement activity you submit if you're a small practice. If you submit at least one quality measure, you're also going to receive 6 bonus points to your numerator score in that quality category. And you qualify for automatic reweighting of the promoting interoperability performance category to 0%. So in summary, lots of perks if you're a small practice. And for our kind of last bit of crucial information needed to score your practice in MIPS are the categories and their weights. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the 4 categories in our MIPS, but again, they're quality, promoting interoperability, which I refer to as PI, improvement activities, also referred to as IA, and then lastly, cost. And these categories are what control your score. Each one has different requirements and their own scoring complexities, which is what we're going to explore today. We're actually not going to cover the cost category scoring as there's no data submission in this category. Again, CMS is looking at your claims throughout the year and scoring you on Medicare spending per beneficiary, total cost per capita, as well as some other episode specialty-based measures if they're applicable. So we actually don't have to do any math there, only in the other 3 categories. So let's start with what I would deem the hardest category to score. While I still have you all, it's early, which is quality. So the quality category is worth 30% of your final score. Unless, again, you're a small practice who doesn't have to report PI, lucky you, since you're automatically allowed to skip it, then it would actually be worth 40% of your final score. So you have to report on this for a full year, meaning January 1st to December 31st. We are tracking data for a score in this category. Now, there are a total of 200 plus measures to pick from, and you only have to pick 6 to be scored on. What a lot of people don't understand is how to select those top 6 measures and score them, which is what we're going to focus on. Gone are the days for any of these categories that if you hit a certain percentage, you pass a measure. Now, you have to score as high as possible on every single measure you submit, and how many points you get for each one, specifically in the quality category, will depend on the measure's benchmark. So I think we're probably familiar with the concept of benchmarking, but in this scenario, your performance on each quality measure is going to be assessed against a benchmark to see how many points you earn for that measure. Meaning, you're going to look at your performance rate and compare it to the benchmark CMS has created for that measure, and it will tell you how many points you earn out of a possible 10. Now, benchmarks are differentiated by collection type. There may be different benchmarks for the same measure if it can be reported through multiple collection types. So when I say collection types, I'm referring to ECQMs, MIPS CQMs, QCDR or Qualified Data Registry measures, or claims-based measures. So we'll go through the differences between these collection types or methods in our quality lunch and learn, but know that based on how you submit a measure will impact which benchmark is used for scoring. So as we'll see in just a few slides, this complicates things massively because a 100% on one measure may only earn you 7 points, but a 45% on another measure might earn you the full 10 points. So you can see why it's so difficult to understand your own data because you can't just look at your report and pick the top 6 with the highest percentage. It's now all about these benchmarks. Now, you might be wondering, well, who creates these benchmarks or how are they created? Well, no shock here, CMS establishes them and they do release new ones every single year. So these change year to year. The benchmarks for each collection type are actually based on performance data from a baseline period, which is the 12-month calendar year, 2 years prior to the performance period. So what this means, the historical benchmarks for 2023 for this year were established from quality data that was submitted for 2021 performance period. But note, even if there was a performance data submitted or any type of data submitted for quality measures in 2021, the 2021 and 2023 measure specs have to be comparable in order for them to create one for 2023. Meaning there shouldn't be any significant changes to the measure between 2021 and 2023 to create one. If there were significant changes, then we wouldn't have a benchmark for that measure, and that happens more frequently than you would think, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, let's focus on what specifically a quality measure has to have in order to earn points. So here are the basics. It has to have a benchmark. Seems obvious after my long spiel on the slide before, but just know not all of them do. It has to meet the case minimum, and it has to meet what's called data completeness. So let's start with the easiest, the measure has to meet the case minimum, which is a very fancy way of saying the denominator has to be over 20. So since the reporting period is a full year, this means you need to have at least 20 patients or visits, depending on the measure, included in that measure's denominator over the year to be scored on it. This makes sense, right? Obviously, a measure with a 200 over 200 means more than a 1 over 1. You know, the 200 over 200 is a better indicator of performance because it applies more to the patient population you're serving. Next, it has to have a benchmark. So again, not all measures actually have a benchmark, and this changes every year for various reasons. So a measure without a historical benchmark, CMS will actually try to calculate a benchmark based on performance data submitted for the current year. If there is no benchmark calculated, you will not be able to be scored on it, unless you're a small practice. Then they just give you 3 points for the measure, even if it doesn't have a benchmark. So again, another perk for small practices. And then lastly, the measure must meet data completeness. So what does data completeness even mean? So this data completeness refers to the actual volume of performance data reported for the measure's eligible population. So let's break this down. When reporting a quality measure, your submission must identify the total eligible population, which is basically your denominator, right? All the patients or all the visits that apply for that measure. To meet data completeness criteria, you must then report performance data, so your numerator, your exclusions, et cetera, for at least 70% of the total eligible population. So incomplete reporting of a measure's eligible population, or some sort of misrepresenting, excuse me, a clinician or your practice's performance, really trying to only submit favorable performance data, is called cherry picking, and it wouldn't be considered true or accurate or complete in CMS's eyes and would subject you to an audit. I do want to note that data completeness is specific to Medicare patients for Medicare Part B claims measures only. The rest of them, QCDR, MIPS CQM, and ECQMs, are going to include all payer data. So measures that don't meet data completeness will earn 0 points, unless, again, you're part of a small practice, in which case it'll earn you 3 points. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about this whole data completeness concept. I know it sounds confusing, but if you're using a certified registry or a certified EHR, they will either usually require you to report on 100% of patients who qualify for the measure, aka there's no way to cherry pick, or if it's a registry and you are doing some sort of manual upload of data, they usually tell you where you're at compared to that 70% requirement for each measure. So it seems scary, but likely whatever submission method you're using right now already accounts for this, and it's not an issue. So once you've identified measures that have a benchmark, they have over 20 in their denominator, and they meet data completeness, you're going to actually then want to use the benchmarks to assign points. So points are determined by mapping that performance rate on your report to the benchmark for the measure, specific to the collection type. So let's look at this process closer. This is actually an extract from the 2023 benchmarking file showing the range of performance rates associated with each decile for the collection type for specifically the BMI measure. So you want to determine the decile that the performance rate falls into for a measure submitted based on collection type. In this example, like I said, we've got measure 128, the BMI measure, with the collection type of MIPS CQM, and our performance rate is 99.46. Again, because benchmarks are specific to collection type, a measure reported as an ECQM will be compared to a different benchmark than the same measure reported as a MIPS CQM, which you can see them, listed over top of each other on that screenshot. Again, in this example, you can see that, for this one in particular, the ECQM version of this measure, which is CMS 69, doesn't have a benchmark. Oftentimes, what we find, right, is one benchmark is actually going to be more favorable over another when you're comparing your ECQMs and your MIPS CQMs. So if you do have access to both of these measure types, the benchmark should factor into your selection of your top 6 measures, absolutely. What this kind of means, right? If you get an 80% on a measure for the full 10 points using the ECQM version, where you would get, let's say, 100% for the MIPS CQM version of that same measure, you're going to want to pick the ECQM version to focus on throughout the year, right? The percentage to earn 10 points is lower. So again, in this example, you can see where our performance rate lands. It's in decile 6. We would earn 6 points. So long story short, benchmarks control everything in the quality category. Your score, your measure selection, really your entire reporting strategy should depend on this benchmark file each year. So back to this example, like I said, we've identified decile 6 for this measure. So the next step would be to get the exact score for this measure. That's just the whole number. The exact score, for this measure, or where our performance rate was, will be somewhere between 6 and 6.9. So to get this exact number, you would follow the formula you see on the screen, taking the performance rate and different decile ranges, again, right from the benchmark file. This formula also is included in the benchmark file in a different tab. We're going to send out a copy of this slide so you have it, but again, it is in the benchmark file anyway you would download from the QPP resource library. Now, once you plug in all the information, you would get your exact score. I'm going to be honest. Me and my team, we usually don't do exact scoring until the very end of the year. The whole number pretty much suffices to understand where you're at and be able to prioritize or select your top 6 to 9 measures. You absolutely can do so. But again, we typically do the whole number calculation just using the benchmark file and get more into the nitty gritty using this formula towards the end of the year. Now, you just need to then repeat the assignment of these achievement points for each selected measure, going through that same process. Then you would sort and group measures based on the points, not the performance rate. And your goal is to have 6 10-point measures for your provider or your practice to report on at the end of the year. Keep in mind, if you achieve this early on in the year, let's say you run your numbers right now, you've got 6 10-point measures, you're good to go. Not the case. Remember, you need to maintain this throughout the entire year. Your data is going to continue to evolve. Your performance rate will continue to change. So even if you think you're at the point where you've got 6 10-point measures, you followed the process, you looked at the benchmarks, you still have to maintain this for the rest of the year. So since you know the details of the scoring process, now I want to specifically point out measures you should avoid. So keep in mind our goal is to get 6 measures that are 10 points each. To do that, you should try and not report on measures that have no benchmark, right? Since you'll only learn 0 or 3 points, depending on your practice's size. Now, if you want to submit a measure that has a really high performance rate, but it doesn't have a benchmark, you can submit it as an extra measure, maybe your 7th or 8th measure, in case they do create a benchmark for it based on data submitted for that year. That one might score higher than one of your other 6 measures. You don't want to report on any measure with less than 20 in the denominator, again, for obvious reasons we already mentioned. And then for the reason we just went over, you don't want to report on measures that have a low performance rate compared to their benchmark. And I stress the compared to their benchmark portion because that measure could have a 97%, and you might really want to report on it. But if it can only earn you 4 points and another measure with only a 55% would earn you the full 10 points, you need to go with the 55% one. Remember, it's all about the benchmark. And these habits are hard to break, right, from previous programs. So speaking of which, in the benchmark file, there are measures that are what CMS refers to as topped out or have a 7-point cap, which we usually also want to avoid. So let's start with topped out. If a measure is topped out, basically this means a large percentage of clinicians in the historical benchmark data set achieved that maximum performance rate. They got the 100%, they got the 10 points. These benchmarks, you can identify them pretty quickly because when one or more of the deciles between that 1 and 9 have dashes in them, like you can see on the screen, while decile 10 still has that 100% or 0% if it's an inverse measure. So the higher the percentage of clinicians that actually met that maximum 10 points, the more deciles that will show that have those dashes in there. So you can still earn 10 points on a topped out measure. You just have to make sure you earn exactly 100%. So if you're at 100%, absolutely use it as part of your top 6. The issue is when you're at 99.99% and you're only getting 5 points. The last type of measure to avoid, unless you're a small practice, is a measure capped at 7 points. So measures that are topped out for 2 consecutive years are then capped at 7 points. Even if your performance rate falls in deciles 7 through 10, the benchmark file will actually still display values from deciles 7 to 10, even though the measure can't earn more than 7 points. Strange, I know, it feels like a trap. But the last column on the spreadsheet will state 7-point cap, and then it'll say yes or no. So you can't overlook this. Again, we want 6 measures that are 10 points each. So if a measure is capped at 7 points and we report one, we're already short 3 points from a perfect score immediately. I mentioned small practices can report on these only because they're given bonus points that could make up for the difference here. But again, you could not report on more than 2 7-point cap measures and still get a perfect score. Which means, if you haven't already figured it out and done the math, MIPS Math, I mentioned it at the very beginning, small practices get 6 bonus points added to their quality category score. There actually used to be more opportunities for bonus points for all practices, no matter your size, but those were actually removed in 2022. So once you have your top 6 measures selected based on their points, not performance rate, you add them up and you divide by 60. 60 is the total number of available points. There are some scenarios where this may change, but for our exercise, let's say we earn 49 points across our 6 measures and we're a small practice. This means we've earned a 55 out of 60 for quality, right? 49 plus 6, we're at 55. Since the quality category is weighted at 30%, we would take 55 divided by 60, which is 0.92, and we would multiply that by 30, which is 27.5. So based on the benchmarks and points earned, our quality category score that contributes to our final MIPS score is a 27.5 out of 30. And that's quality. That is the most difficult category to score with the most amount of math involved. But let's go ahead and quickly test your knowledge. Let's say we have Dr. Smith, and he's reviewing his measures for selection for 2023 reporting, and he's looking at measure ID 130, documentation of current medications. His performance rate is 100%. It looks great on his report, and he wants to report it. So he looks at the benchmark file. How many points would this measure earn him? So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. The poll's open. Do you think he would earn the full 10 points? Do you think he would only earn 3 points? Do you think he would earn 7 points? Or do you think he would earn 0 points based on the benchmark file? We'll give everyone just a minute or two to answer. Looks like responses are still coming in. Well, we've got some vying answers here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the poll here in 3, 2, 1. So it looks like we've got a toss up here between our top answer or not our top, but 40% answered 10, and then 60% answered 7. So the correct answer is actually 7, and that's because there's a 7-point cap. So again, don't forget to look at that last column on the spreadsheet where it's a 7-point cap. It'll try and trip you up. So even with 100%, he can only score 7 points because of that tiny little column in the benchmark file. So great lesson learned there. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kimmy, who will actually take us through our next category of PI, or promoting interoperability scoring. So Kimmy, it is all yours.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was great. Seeing all the things you had to say about the quality performance. I forget how confusing. I loved your explanation of it. Okay, so let's talk promoting interoperability. As Lindsay has mentioned previously, there are some exclusions that are available. So when it comes to promoting interoperability, if you're a practice with fewer than 15 clinicians or any of the specialties that are listed in the image in this slide, you don't have to report this category. How exciting, right? There are cases when we do use this category in the case that, if the second performance or the scored performance in the other categories is lower than desired, we can use the promoting interoperability to aid in avoiding that negative payment adjustment. If you are excluded, the performance category will automatically be related to 0%. So that 25% that this would be worth goes to 0. And this means you don't need to submit promoting interoperability data, and the performance category's 25% weight is redistributed to the quality performance category and IA categories. If that's a little confusing, we'll review that a little later. And this applies if you find your specialty listed in this graphic picture. So now, if you submit PI data, CMS will score your performance and weight your promoting interoperability performance category at 25% of your final MIPS score. And the submission of the data cancels out any kind of reweighting. So at submission, if you are uploading any PI data, that reweight that would have applied if you were excluding completely goes away. So here's an example of what reweighting in multiple scenarios will look like. When categories are reweighted, you might be wondering how they get redistributed. You can see in this image that if promoting interoperability is reweighted, improvement activities and cost are worth 30% of your final score and quality is worth 40%. If promoting interoperability and cost are reweighted, both improvement activities and quality are both worth 50%. Similar to if promoting interoperability and quality are reweighted, improvement and costs are then worth 50% each. Now that we understand what happens when categories are reweighted, let's review what's required to report for promoting interoperability. Okay, so if you are not excluding from promoting interoperability and you do have to report at a 30,000-foot view, you must submit data for certain measures for each of the 4 objective measures, unless an exclusion is claimed for the same 90 continuous days or more during 2023. You must have a minimum performance period of 90 continuous days between January 1st of the year of the current year, so 2022 through December 31st. And then you must also use a certified EHR EMR technology that is 2015 edition Cures certified. And you must also be scored at the individual measure level based on performance. All right, so like we mentioned previously, there is a single set of measures and objectives you must report for the 2023 performance period as outlined in the table picture. When you report on required measures that have a numerator or denominator, you must submit at least a 1 in the numerator if you don't claim an exclusion. Now, when we say 1, this is by no means is the goal. You want to score as high as possible, and some get confused when they hear that all you need is 1 in the numerator to pass promoting interoperability, but that's not the case. If you score low on these measures, and therefore that category you could submit would be penalized. So please note, any conflicting data submitted via multiple submission methods for a single measure or required attestation will result in a score of 0 for the promoting interoperability performance category. For example, if you submit data via your EHR and also go into your QPP portal and manually input numbers, CMS will give you a 0 for conflicting data submissions, even if your numbers are the exact same. We unfortunately had a client go through this exact scenario prior to working with our team, and they were penalized. CMS would not appeal it. So now, the 2023 Promoting Interoperability performance categories focus on the following objectives: e-prescribing, health information exchange, provider to patient exchange, and the public health and clinical data exchange. Within these objectives, there are 6 to 7 required measures dependent upon which measures you choose to report for the HIE objective, in addition to required attestations and optional measures. Okay, each required measure will be scored based on the performance data you report. With the bonus point opportunity, there are 105 bonus points, or there are 105 total points available, though the promoting interoperability performance category is capped at 100 points. Any points scored over the 100 will result in a 25 out of 25 for the PI category. Okay. Now, CMS calculates the performance rate for each measure using the numerators and denominators you submitted for measures, very similar to what we see for your quality performance, right? And so with those numerators and denominators you've submitted, we then multiply the performance rate by the total points available for the measure or objective. There's one scored objective, public health and the clinical data exchange, and 3 measures, the query of the PDMP, HIE, bidirectional exchange, enabling exchange under TESTA, where we use the yes or no as the answer for the submitted measures. If a MIPS eligible clinician submits a numerator and denominator of 200 over 250 for the e-prescribing measure, and this is worth up to 10 points, the performance rate is 80%. This 80% would be multiplied by the 10 total points available for the measure. In this case, e-prescribing would earn 8 out of 10 points. It's a perfect proportional. So when calculating the performance rates, measure and objective scores, and the promoting interoperability performance category score, CMS will generally round to the nearest whole number. The promoting interoperability performance category is weighted at 25% of the MIPS final score, as we mentioned. There are 105 total points available, but any score above 100 will be capped at 100 points. So your promoting interoperability performance category score is the sum of points earned for the measures you submitted multiplied by the 25% promoting interoperability performance category weight. This product is the number of points this performance category contributes to the MIPS final score. You'll always be scored out of 100 possible points in the promoting interoperability category. When you claim an exclusion for a measure, the measure's points are reallocated to a different measure. So to review, let's say you want to review what your score is going to be. You'll want to add up the points of your required measures, the sum of points earned for the measures you've submitted, plus any bonus points you have earned. Once you have achieved the final sum, you'll want to multiply by the 25% promoting interoperability performance category weight. And once your calculations are completed, you'll have your final score for your PI category to add to your scores of the other categories. All right, so we've talked about scoring examples and all of that. Let's look at the exclusions. Okay.
I apologize, Kim. My slides got away from me.
No problem at all. The following promoting interoperability measures have exclusions if you qualify. You can claim the exclusion instead of reporting on the given measure. You're able to claim an exclusion for e-prescribing if you're a MIPS eligible clinician who writes fewer than 100 permissible prescriptions during the performance period. Also, you can claim an exclusion if you're a provider who is unable to electronically prescribe Schedule II opioids and Schedule III and Schedule IV drugs in accordance with applicable law during the performance period. You can claim an exclusion for PDMP if querying a PDMP would impose an excessive workflow or cost burden prior to the start of the performance period, then they select in 2023. You can exclude from referral loops by sending or receiving if you're a provider who transfers a patient to another setting or refers a patient fewer than 100 times during the performance period. Any MIPS eligible clinician meeting one or more of the following criteria may be excluded from the immunization registry reporting measure. If you don't administer any immunizations to any of the populations for which data is collected, or if any of the immunization information system during the performance period. So if it's not in your jurisdiction. So that means if you don't submit any immunizations or it's not in your jurisdiction to prescribe those immunizations. There's also exclusions available if you operate in a jurisdiction for which no immunization registry or immunization information system is capable of accepting the specific standards required to meet the CEHRT definition at the start of the performance period, or if you operate where there's no immunization registry or there's no declared readiness to receive that immunization data 6 months prior to the start of the performance period. For electronic case reporting, there are also exclusions available that include if you do not treat any of those, if you do not treat or diagnose any reportable diseases for which data is collected by your jurisdiction reportable disease system during the performance period, or if in your jurisdiction for which no public health agency is capable of receiving electronic case reporting data in the specific standards required to meet the certified EHR definition at the start of the performance period. And lastly, if there is no public health agency that has jurisdiction or has declared readiness to receive electronic case reporting as early as 6 months prior to the start of the performance period. Okay, so you'll see here that for any of our promoting interoperability measures, there are reallocations that are available. So even if you claim 1 or 2 exclusions for the immunization registry reporting and electronic case reporting measures, you can still earn a total of 5 bonus points by reporting 1, 2, or 3 of the optional public health and clinical data exchange measures. Okay. One more, Lindsay. Thank you. Okay, so I know we talked about a lot of math and exclusions. That's probably given your brain a workout. Let's have a nice break to check your understanding and make sure what we're providing you makes sense. So how many points is your promoting interoperability category worth towards your final score if no exclusions are taken? 100, 30, 20, or 25? And Lindsay, I know you're running
responses are rolling in here, so we'll give everyone a few more seconds here to get their answers in. Maybe you're trying to go for a perfect score so far, or redeem yourself from our last poll here. We do have a variation of answers, so we'll give everyone just a minute here. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to go ahead and share the poll results, and Kimmy, you can go ahead and share the answers.
So a differentiation of results here, the final answer is 25 points. Your promoting interoperability category is worth 25 points if there are no exclusions taken.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bridget, who will take us through our last category scoring for today, improvement activities. Bridget, take it away.
Thank you, Kimmy. That was great. Okay, so let's start on improvement activities. We're going to dive into this category, the improvement activities category, or as we refer to it as the IA category. For 2023, IA is worth 15% of your MIPS final score. It also requires a minimum performance of 90 continuous days between January 1st, 2023 and December 31st, 2023. And this 90-day period does not need to match your promoting interoperability 90 days, nor does it need to be in a specific quarter. IA can be reported at any time as long as it is in the 90 consecutive days reporting period. Now, there are a few exceptions to this rule, but the majority are only required to be reported for 90 days. If you are reporting as a group, CMS does require 50% of the group's NPI clinicians to perform the same IA activities. So keep in mind, you will need to have an audit documentation showing 50% of providers completed this IA. There are over 100 plus activities to choose from, and it is just that, a list of activities for you to review and select ones that you are currently doing to get credit. There is no data required for this category. It is just a yes attestation. But you should always have documentation to back up in case you get audited. The idea here is not to reinvent the wheel. You want to select activities that reflect what your practice is already doing. CMS, as of now, allows you to report the same activities year over year. However, I will note that in their most recent inventory, they did add a note to encourage clinicians to report different activities year over year. So we may see a new requirement in this category to switch it up in future years. Now let's look at the scoring. Each activity contains a weight. The medium weighted activities are worth 10 points and high are worth 20 points. The maximum score for this performance category is 40 points. So you can do any combination of activities you want to add up to 40, as you can see on the bottom graphic of the slide. Another important item is that if you're reporting as a group, CMS will combine improvement activities submitted through attestation, file upload, and/or direct submission into a single performance category score not to exceed 100%. If you submit the same activity through multiple submission types, the improvement activity will only be counted once, which makes sense. Now keep in mind, the more activities you report, the more audit documentation you have to have saved down. So we encourage clients to review the high-weighted activities first and then move on to the medium-weighted if needed. Now, this isn't always the case, since there are some medium-weighted activities that align with quality measures. So if you are reporting a quality measure that aligns with your IA, you would already have your documentation and be all set. Again, it is whatever is best for your practice. It is not a one-size-fits-all. Now, the weighting is a bit different if you are considered a small practice. If you are a small practice, non-patient-facing clinicians and/or clinicians located in rural or health professional shortage areas, the HPSAs, the weight of these activities are doubled, meaning the high-weighted are worth 40 and the medium are worth 20, essentially cutting your reporting responsibility in half. These statuses would show when you search your NPI using that nifty lookup tool we covered a few slides ago. So again, just another perk if you're a small practice, and another reason to make sure you look up your eligibility or statuses every single year so you know what you have to report. So the IA category is generally 15% of your final score, which means you take your IA performance category score and multiply it by the 15% improvement activities performance category weight. The overall improvement activities performance category score is added to the other performance category scores to determine your MIPS final score. You can't earn more than 40 points in this performance category, regardless of the number of activities you submit. And please note that submission platforms may allow you to attest more than 40 points worth of activities. And if you do attest to more than 40 points worth of activities, you're responsible for compiling and maintaining documentation for all activities to which you attest, even though these additional activities won't increase your score. So let's put some actual numbers to that explanation and look at a few scoring scenarios. In the first scenario, you're a MIPS eligible clinician in a small practice, 15 or fewer clinicians, and complete one high-weighted improvement activity and one medium-weighted improvement activity for 60 points in the performance category. However, because 40 is the maximum points awarded, you'll receive 40 points total. In the second scenario, you're a MIPS eligible clinician in a large practice, and you complete one medium-weighted improvement activity for 10 of 40 points in the performance category. This is definitely not ideal. And honestly, there should be no reason why you don't get 100% in this category year after year. Now, the third scenario is a bit advanced, but I think you guys can handle it. So picture this. You're a MIPS eligible clinician in a small practice and complete one medium-weighted improvement activity for 20 out of 40 points in the performance category. You don't submit promoting interoperability data, which means the promoting interoperability performance category is automatically weighted at 0, and the improvement activities performance category is weighted at 30. But wait, there's more. Your practice also cannot be scored on any cost measures, making your IA category worth 50% of your total score, meaning you would earn 25 points for IA when you could have earned 50. Again, please don't ever let this happen. But since I was the last category for us to review today, I wanted to show you how everything fits together and affects each other based on category weights, exclusions, and special statuses. And yes, it can get complex or confusing. So since this can get a bit complicated, let's do a quick review of what we have learned and put your knowledge to the test. You're a MIPS eligible clinician in a small practice, 15 or fewer clinicians, and complete one high weighted improvement activity and one medium weighted improvement activity. What is your category score? And we'll have Lindsay.
Yep, the poll is launched.
All right.
Yep. Feel free to answer. Responses are rolling in now. Oh boy, Bridget, I think they're going to be mad at us. All right, we'll give everyone here until the count of 3. Get your final responses in just for time. Going to go ahead and close it in 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to share the results. Bridget, I don't know if you can
okay, yes, all right. And this is good. This is kind of what we were expecting. So yes, 60 is correct since medium is at 20 and high is 40 for small practices. But if you picked 40, I know where you were coming from because since 40 is the maximum amount of points you can get that will count towards your final score. I know we're horrible people and we basically gave you a trick question. And please don't throw any of your lunch items at the screen. I promise we will make it up to you, but you guys did a great job. All right, Lindsay, I'll hand this over to you now.
Perfect. Thank you, Bridget. And again, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to try and wrap this up pretty quickly and go through the final steps, which is basically just putting it all together. And we've really talked about it almost at the end of each category, right? So just a final review, we need to make sure we take your category score and multiply it by the correct category weight. And then we just add them all together to get your score, your final score out of 100. So a quick example here. Top examples, large practice, bottom is small practice, exact same numbers. So for quality, an 85.8%. For cost, we got a 63%. For improvement activities, of course, we earned 100%. And then for the PI category, we had an 89%. So we're going to multiply that by our category weight times 100, and you can see our category score. So for, again, the large practice here, our total score by adding up our category scores is an 81.89. What's interesting and what I wanted to point out, both Kimmy and Bridget mentioned if you're a small practice, you've got certain perks here, right? Especially that you don't have to report PI. So if I was a small practice and I had those exact same metrics and I didn't report my PI category, you can see my total score goes up to 83.22. So by not submitting PI, we actually earned a higher score. And that's not always the case. It might actually be opposite, that reporting PI will actually get you a higher score. So this really showcases how important the category weights are in these calculations and your final score as well. Now, again, I did promise to go over what this score even means. As we know, your MIPS final score is going to be somewhere between 0 to 100. The range in which it falls will actually determine if you earn an incentive payment, if you get penalized, or if you're in the neutral. So in our example, you can see we were over 75 points, which is the threshold, so we're safe from penalty, and we're going to earn a positive payment adjustment. Yay. Why am I saying yay? Well, because these adjustments actually impact your Medicare Part B claims for an entire year, 2 years after the performance year. So let's say for this example, we earned a 2% positive increase based on our score in 2021. What this means is that starting January 1st of this year, of 2023, for the entire year until 12/31/2023, we would see a line item adjustment of a positive 2% on all of our Medicare Part B claim reimbursements happening this year from our 2021 MIPS performance. Now, the tricky part is CMS can't tell us what your payment adjustment will be at the time of submission. We find that out the summer following submission. So this July or August, we'll know what our final score and payment adjustments are for the 2022 performance year that just passed, and those will take effect January 1st, 2024. If you're asking why this is, again, quick recap, just due to time. MIPS is required by law to be budget neutral. So basically, this means the penalties are what fund the incentives. So the more clinicians that are penalized, the greater the incentives. So they can't figure that out, obviously, until they have everyone's submissions to figure out who's penalized and who would get the incentives. So quick kind of crash course here. I know we have a minute left. We'll send out a recording of the slides too if you do have to sign off. But if we put all these steps together and run through a quick example, first step, we're going to determine your eligibility. We're going to review the special statuses and we're going to decide individual versus group reporting. For my example, I belong to a practice and 10 out of my 24 providers are individually eligible. So I'm going to pick, instead of trying to report for 10 individual providers, looking at 10 data sets, I'm going to go ahead and report us as a group. We're a large practice and we don't have any special statuses. So we're going to start with improvement activities. I reviewed the 2023 inventory and I selected 3 activities. We're not a PCMH. If we were, we would have earned full credit. We're actually working with PCMH recognition with the DAS GI team right now, of course. But again, since we're a large practice, I identified 1 high-weighted activity and 2 medium-weighted activities. I picked 2 medium-weighted activities on purpose. I know it's more audit documentation, but I'm submitting closing the referral loop CMS 50 and fall screening CMS 139 as part of my quality measures. So that documentation's taken care of and it made it easier on me. This means we would get the full 40 points based on that high 20 points and the 2 10 points added up. Step 3 is PI, and it's a bit trickier, right? I'm going to jump right ahead to the example. In real life, I wanted to make sure that our EHR upgrade, because we've got to be on that 2015 cert this year, was completed at the end of March. So in the meantime, before that, I made sure that my team looked at our security risk analysis and our new SAFER guide that's required this year to make sure we started making progress. I researched our state for electronic case reporting to see if they were ready. In this practice, we're in South Carolina, so we can exclude because they're not ready to accept that type of data. Even though I'm a PCMH, somehow in my fictitious example, I don't provide immunizations, so I can also exclude from that one. However, my providers do occasionally prescribe narcotics. I'm talking 1 here or there, but I still have to sign them up with our state prescription drug monitoring program prior to our 90 days to make sure that we can get credit for that one. Also newly required this year. Then I start looking at our data again. The beauty of PIs, it's 90 days. So I'm going to start looking at it right away after our EHR upgrade in April. But I'm also, if we don't get where we want to be in those 90 days, I'm going to look at it again in July and, in Q3 and Q4 as well. So currently, we're earning 100% on e-prescribing. Great. We're only earning 4% on HIE send, that 3 out of 75. HIE receives much better at 324 out of 400, and then patient access, we're at a 90%, which is great. Now, looking at what we want to do from an exclusion standpoint, that 3 out of 75 performance is really bad, and since our denominator is under 100, I'm going to exclude from that HIE send. But now you might be saying, oh, well, e-prescribing is under 100, it's at 99, let's exclude from that one too. Wrong, we want to keep that one because the performance is so high. Our score would actually go down if we excluded from that measure. So even though an exclusion is available to you for a measure, you might not always want to take it depending on how it impacts your score. So again, with the measure exclusions taken into account, right, we're excluding from HIE send, we're going to exclude from the electronic case reporting, and then we're going to not exclude from e-prescribing. So what happens is all of that weight from the HIE send measure and the electronic case reporting immunization measure gets actually put on the patient access measure. So that final bullet, you can see e-prescribing still worth 10 points, along with our PDMP is worth 10 points. HIE receives out of 15 points, and then the patient access measure actually jumped up from 25 points to 65 points just based on our exclusions. But it was at 90%, so that's a good thing. So you can see we earned a 90.65 out of 100, which translates over when multiplied by our category weight to a 22.66 out of 25, which isn't too bad. I personally would try again for a different 90 days. If we look at quality, again, going right to the example here, we're not a small practice, right? So I picked my measures on the left-hand side. They're sorted by performance rate, and you can see our total to 36 out of 60 if we submitted our top 6 measures in bold. On the right-hand side, we sorted the measures by the actual points they earned compared to the benchmark file. And you can see our score jumps up to a 52 out of 60. That is 16 points we would have left on the table if we gave in to our old habits of trying to report based on performance rate. That CMS 22, that performance rate of a 48% is earning us 10 points that we probably wouldn't have picked out on our report before this webinar that we knew to really check the benchmarks and how to score these. And then calculating your final MIPS score. So again, if we look at in that bottom blue box, we have our quality, which was a 52 out of 60 times the category weight. Improvement activities were 100%, and then PI pulling that forward. Unfortunately, we don't know what cost is earning us right now. We actually haven't had feedback reports on cost in a few years, but if they do release it with our 2022 final scores this summer, I would recommend you use that in your score estimations. That's going to be your best indicator of performance. Again, let's try and understand what this means monetarily, right? So let's say you have your final score. How is this going to work? Or you have your payment adjustment. Always remember, you can access your Medicare allowed charges in your QPP portal, and you just take your payment adjustment and multiply it by those allowed charges to see your actual financial impact. So one number that won't change is the maximum penalty of -9%. So you can always take that 0.09 times your Medicare allowed charges. For this fictitious practice, let's use 1.6 million. If we did not report anything or we scored really low and got the full penalty, that means we would be losing $144,000 over a year's time in Medicare reimbursement just from our MIPS performance. So with that financial impact in mind, and with already being over time, we might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed, but that's okay. You really don't have to do MIPS alone. Your GI team here at DAS really is to help. We are here for ongoing support, for as needed support. We've got different packages. We can take it all off your plate. We can just help you. We can even train you on the program, to eventually take it in-house. We just want to provide some sort of assistance to make it easier. So if you are asking yourself what your next step should be after today's webinar, please visit our website. Really continue to sign up for these webinars. I swear they always don't go over on time. Our category specific ones that are more deep dives are really meant to be closer to 25 to 30 minutes to leave time for lots of questions. So I know this is a ton of information. If you do want to learn more about how we can help you, reach out to your DAS account manager, or if you don't have one, you can actually email us directly at the email on the screen, governmentincentives@dashealth.com. You can also email me directly. It's lindsay.landing@dashealth.com. And please don't hesitate to reach out. So I know we're over on time. If there were any questions in the chat, we will make sure to export those and follow up with you personally. Again, and if you have any questions you weren't able to ask due to time, again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here, we don't bite, we're humans, as you can see today, and we really just want to help. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you, or at least seeing your, I can't say faces, your names on our future webinars, especially for our MIPS and CHIPS series coming up in the next few weeks. So thank you to Kimmy and Bridget as well, and all your knowledge and help with this presentation. And yep. Oh, perfect. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.